All right, welcome back everyone. If you could kindly take your seats, we'll make a start. So next up, we have a good friend of mine, Darren Pauli, who'll be talking about writing with clarity, simple steps to become a faster, more effective communicator. And I think communication these days is so super important, so thank you. So meet Darren Pauli. I've asked ChatGPT to write this one for me, by the way, mate. So meet Darren Pauli, the cybersecurity wizard who thwarts hackers with a wink and a whoopee cushion. Known as the cybersecurity trickster, he cracks codes while juggling flaming USB drives. With his wit and charm, Darren keeps cyber criminals guessing and penguins encrypting their fish. Can we have a warm round of applause for Darren Pauli?
Very good. You got a clicker thing? Oh, sweet. Cool. Hi everyone, my name's Darren. I'm probably best known, let's see if I can get the button working first, sorry. Beautiful. Probably best known for my former career as a journalist. I wrote for a bunch of tech mastheads for a bit over 10 years, and for the last 6 years or so, I've worked inside of Telstra's cybersecurity unit, but I'm here just in a personal capacity. Also, there's a fair bit of information. It's a beautiful dovetail, actually, to that talk. I love that. Definitely go and do stakeholder mapping, for sure. There's a guide. It should be in the app. I've also got a QR code at the end of the talk, so you don't need to try to retain all this stuff. It'll drive you nuts. Roger Angell was a man with many names, a national treasure, the poet laureate of baseball, a man whose prose and editorial judgment was difficult to overstate, who seemed unable to write a boring sentence. Really high praise. And perhaps his most memorable story was one about a guy, a would-be all-star pitcher called Steve Blass. Steve Blass was a force. Pity the batter who came up against Steve. Until one day, Steve walked onto the pitch and he couldn't throw. Psychologists were called, doctors were summoned, his team stood behind him, and Steve never threw again. Angell was such a master of communication that his story, you may not care about baseball. Indeed, I don't much. But you will care about Steve Blass. There's a book that you should all get. It's called The Elements of Style. It's $10 on Amazon. In the guide later on, I've got a whole bunch of recommended reading. In the foreword of that, he wrote that we are all readers and writers, as well as communicators, with at times the need for clear and almost perfect thought. And it's a little bit romantic, I'll give you that. But I really love it. And in the scores of articles that I've written over time, over the years, I've probably achieved that once or twice. For me, it means that what you've written on the page, the emotion in the page, the description of whatever it is you're writing about is exactly what you hoped. And that the person reading it, you know that they understand exactly what you meant. Now, you don't need to pour Angell's prose onto the page to be a good writer. And today isn't about that at all. In fact, all I want to do is give you the simple structures to become an effective communicator and an effective writer. What you really need is stickler-like consistency and a really thick skin, tenacity. You need to welcome negative criticism. Useless positive praise is great, but you can't do a lot with it. It's not easy. I'm Swiss by birth. You wouldn't tell by the accent. And most of my family are over in Switzerland. And one day, my auntie was in university and she had a big assignment coming up. And she couldn't reckon this contradiction in grammar and the English language. And I said, aren't you lucky? You've got nephews, will solve your problems for you. And about 20 minutes later, I found myself apologising. You ever seen those people that chase the cheese log down the hill And the legs are spinning and the arms are spiraling, and at the bottom, they're all a bloody broken mess. It was kind of what the conversation ended up like. Kind of had to apologise to her and tell her to use Google. Now, you've probably all written a pen testing report or an email or whatever it is, a blog article, and it's been a very good piece. Like it carried something that was very important, but it didn't land. You didn't get any feedback. Oh, thanks very much, Steve. Thanks, Darren. I imagine that you've written an IR report after the event or whatever, has lots of important information. Maybe you wrote a pen testing, something, with all these critical findings in there. Thanks very much, Jerry. And that's about it. In all the emails that I reviewed, scores of them, emails, reports, I've helped cadets, when they come into a newsroom. There's one, what do you think is the commonality between, the reports you wrote that didn't land, the emails that you sent that, didn't result in any kind of action, and all these pieces that, I reviewed? It's poor communication. It's just putting the wrong information in the wrong place, being too technical, using confusing language. So in these tons of reading, I read so many books, and one of them was on the 3-minute pitch. I'm no founder, so I'm gonna let's see how good I get at this. But I want to convince you in the next 3 minutes, if I can, that the blood, sweat, and tears, and there is blood, sweat, and tears, that it takes to change the way that you write into something that's effective is worth the effort. So clarity, writing with clarity, spells effective communication. Now, I'd like to make an analogy about battlefield plans, right? That battlefield, that's the ultimate form of clarity, right? Something's sent down the lines and it's very well understood, but I know anyone who's served will just laugh at me. So, I'll daydream that that's the case. But it means that you're able to articulate your thoughts very clearly. The person who is reading it is able to read that very clearly, and you come away with the same understanding. That leads to less frustration for you trying to articulate your thoughts, right? You've done all this toiling in the salt mines of infosec, and you've managed to, really articulate that really well. And there's fewer mistakes. And I don't just mean in writing, I mean in the way that things are interpreted. We call it burying the lead. I'll get into this a bit later. If you put the most important thing too far down and they have to scroll for it, or maybe they give up and they end up focusing their attention on the wrong thing. You don't need to believe me. A man called Warren Buffett, the former SEC head, wrote in 1998. This is not new information. You can go back way further. He wrote in a document for lawyers and to help them create clearer SEC disclosure documents. And he said that corporate lawyers followed simple writing advice, my life would be much easier. And that's fundamentally what this is about. It's about making everyone's life easier. But it's more than that. Is anyone here like an audiophile, obsessed with kind of headphones and all that? I know you're here. InfoSec is rife with you guys. I love you guys, by the way. You'd know that the kind of headphones that maybe kids wear with a certain nameless brand on the outside, right? Maybe they cost around $100. You could probably pick it up on AliExpress for $30. It's got great marketing, maybe not necessarily the best product. But then you've got really good products that don't sell because their marketing is no good. Is 2023 the year of Linux on the desktop? Probably should be, but it's not. So you should market your ideas, right? You need to, don't waste all that effort that you've spent on the technical side of your work and then let it down with poor communication. If you do that, you're going to be known as, you're going to build a reputation for you and your team, right? People are going to know, oh great, Pete sent this thing through in the sea of emails. We all know how much information we all get now. You're going to stand out. So you're going to be known as someone of signal, no noise. That's a great thing. And more than that, internally in Telstra, it's only sort of bit about Telstra, we run an awareness function, right? So it's kind of an addition to training, I suppose. And writing with clarity underpins everything that we do. We have very talented people in the team that do all this amazing stuff, really good design, whatever, and we kind of treat everyone like friends, try to secure them at home. And we've got 1,000 people that have signed up to our, influence programs, where we give them info sessions and things like that, and we have 1,000 more that cling around the edges. We're quite popular, and we've had a measurable reduction in risk and increase in compliance and all this kind of stuff. And so you end up turning the weakest link into something that is not. I really don't like that term. So if that was 3 minutes, have I convinced you that it's worth your time? Nods? Yeah? Good? Okay, cool. Otherwise, it's going to be very painful the next couple of minutes. So, now, we heard the guys talk about story. And you might ask, why is a guy, we're security people, I write reports. Why is story important? I don't write novels. And maybe you do, and if you do, please hit me up at drinks. I'd love to know about it. But our industry is rich with stories. I was really privileged to have this as a beat, as a journo. My poor colleagues writing about storage, yikes, but stories are really, really, really effective. And I'd struggle to find one element of security that couldn't benefit from this when the findings are significant and when it warrants it. Sure, it's not everywhere. But it works. Psychologist Jerome Bruner in 1986 found that facts are 20 times more memorable than when they're told as facts alone. These are truths that are spoken by writers and psychologists everywhere. They trigger, and we now know that stories trigger dopamine release, right? That prompts concentration and interest. Most of us, 40% of us are visual learners, 40% are auditory learners, 20% are hands-on. And storytelling touches every neurological touch point of those. Basically, it captures everything. I forgot the guy's name, but the guy who created Toy Story said that we are wired from birth from stories. The guys in the last talk mentioned about that very thing, that we tell stories to kids. Every single one of us reads. Stories are a great thing. So pathos is, Aristotle wrote in a book, Rhetoric, about ethos, logos, and pathos. The authoritative, rational, and pathos is emotional, right? That is the king of all of them. Now, it seems at odds to write at that kind of level in security. What relevance does that have? Believe me, it does. I think that in terms of talking about vulnerabilities, right? Vulnerabilities lead to exploits, lead to breaches. What does that lead to? Consequences on people's lives, right? People without money, businesses getting shuttered. These are the sorts of things that you can tap into. You can translate your technical severe findings into something that really resonates. Everyone relates to pathos. What story, what movie, what TV show is watchable without that? It's part of human nature. And surprise is an amazing thing to use, right? We solidify our memories after moments of surprise. Think back in your childhood, right? Something crazy you did as a kid that you pulled it off, or you watched someone have a major stack or something like that. Shock are things that instill in our memory. I was on a Virgin flight somewhere, and they're going through the pre-flight briefing, blah, 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 here's the things, da, da, da. Everyone's reading their phones, reading a book or whatever. And then all of a sudden, this air hostess, amazing, she's talking about the gas mask dropping down, and she says, if you've got, fit it to yourself and then your kids, and in the event that not enough masks drop down, we ask that you pick your favourite. And everyone laughed. Everyone went, what? And then laughed. And I remember that. I don't even remember where I was going, but I remember that. And I'm sure everyone else on that flight does too. So it's a powerful thing. And as I mentioned, it might not have that much, you might not seem that relevant to you, storytelling in the context of cybersecurity. Believe me, it is. I find some of the most interesting stories to be non-fiction. Stephen King wrote in a book that there are only two ways on writing. It's a great book. That there are only two ways to become a great writer, and that's to read a lot and to write a lot. And he doesn't know any other ways around it. And he's correct. He's absolutely correct. Now, we've all got one of those things in the bag. We write all the time. We write emails, write reports constantly. Every one of those things is an opportunity. Don't break yourself, but every one of them is an opportunity to write better or write differently. Reading, you can read anything. You can read any of the papers, it doesn't matter your political persuasion. You can read Sydney Confidential. You can read the sports section. You can read the sugar fiction or the trash mags at the front of the registers, when you go through the shops. Actually, those trash mags are amazing. They're full of lies and bullshit, but they know how to tell a story. They've got this in the bag. I think that's why they still exist. So make sure that you're reading, make it a daily habit, consume whatever you want. it's tough enough, so read something that you enjoy, but not blogs. It's got to be something where, a poor cadet was beaten senselessly until they learnt the rules of writing. And I've read a lot about writer's block. Now, writer's block is a terrible thing, but I think it has a positive side to it. That means that you care. If you don't care, you just put anything on a page. If you're wondering, going, what the hell am I going to say? How do I introduce this? You're caring. I like that. And all these writers, playwrights, poets, I've read them all. And they all kind of said this. The way to get around it is to read, right? I believe that. Run, that's the one thing if I'm in a bad state. Physical exercise does it for me. Rest and rewrite. Little Miss Sunshine, a movie in like 2003. Remember this? Sort of art house sort of thing. Really good, nice movie, charming. Was rewritten. That script was rewritten 100 times. I couldn't do it, my God. But it ended up getting a gong, an Emmy or whatever it is, Oscar, something like that. So it works. And I love this. William Strunk Jr., The Elements of Style, that was the foreword of the quote I read at the start. Excellent book. This is one of the best bits of information I ever had. For me, it was that every word should earn its place. The delete button is always the one that wears out first on my keyboard. The story I might write could have been twice as long compared to how many words I deleted. Use it a lot. If we were to apply that to the famous playwright William Shakespeare, right? Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer day? The darling muds of May, right? So amazing. There's another book on rhetoric. It's beautiful, a lost art, and all this kind of stuff. But let's apply Strunk to that and see what it kind of turns out like, right? Poor Shakespeare, probably rolling in his grave, right? So there's limitations here. We're talking about practical writing, but dead set, absolutely cut the waffle. Another writer put it a little bit more succinctly, and I really agree with him, the great Ernest Hemingway. So remember that your first drafts are not going to be really good. It's also been said that the first, second, and third drafts are going to be miserable. Remember that in your moments of despair. Now, there's tools available to help you. I'm pretty sure they're all paid. So Microsoft has, if you go into the depths of options, you'll find your way to, on the left-hand side there, it has a ridiculous amount of checkboxes. I couldn't believe my eyes when I stumbled across it. Tick every one of them. The squiggly lines are probably going to drive you nuts, but know that Microsoft is correct in almost all circumstances. Try not to argue with it, and it's okay to ship with the squiggly line. That's okay. It will guide you. It'll give, like bumper bowling when you put the rails in because, you don't want to hit the gutter, that kind of thing. Grammarly does the same thing, although both of those retain your documents. So they mask the file name, but they retain the document, and if you think about it, all the gems are in the document. So go and have a look before you venture into there. But they're good programs, and I've used them both, and I recommend them. Now, grammar is a bore. Grammar is amazing. I love it. I hate it. We can thank the sticklers of the 18th century for this quagmire that we currently sit in. They feared for the health of the English language back then, and they all got together, these masters of Greek and Latin, and thought, to hell with the fact that no one could write or read. Let's impose this system that's, awkwardly fits onto English and, stamp it in there until everyone agrees. And there's this wonderful book called The Language Wars. And it's all about the absolute pedants who came up with these things. There was one guy across the ditch in England, and he says, "Thou must not split the infinitive." And then, the guy on the other side of the pond hates him. He goes, "You're a jerk, split the infinitive." And then we have, that's literally how this stuff was formed. It's wild. But it is amazing. I bag it, but I love it. It's something that you should learn. But again, so much of this is don't break yourself, okay? Take your time, look at the basic stuff. When to use commas, apostrophes, stuff like that. And the reason it matters is because even if you don't understand grammar, or like your reader doesn't understand it, it is the signposts that guides them. It helps tell them when they need to take a mental breath, or if it's a speech, an actual breath, a pause, whatever. And it will help you to break up your writing. So master the basics, Google it when you need to, but no need to work out what the hell splitting the infinitive is. And remember this, when you're wondering why is that squiggly line going away, it really is a case of, some of these rules are absolutely ridiculous. And if you want to start a Twitter war between two grammar experts, mention something like this and they'll tear each other to shreds. why am I listening to these? Why did I listen to the two guys before? Why can't we just use ChatGPT? I hit up ChatGPT for some references about awkward, like moments of poor clarity in Australian history. I came up with this: the Menzies fudge. The great towering politician, PM of Australia, Robert Menzies, gave this speech. I'll read it. It's only very short. We took the view, rightly or wrongly, that in the interest of the nation and indeed of the world required the greatest practical freedom of international trade. And all the journalists were like, what? And so it became this thing, this Menzies fudge, right? It was known, it became a thing that you apply to politicians who just talk absolute nonsense. There was a story in 2017 about it, this thing in The Guardian a little while ago. And it was amazing. The only problem is, it's all rubbish. It doesn't exist. The Menzies fudge isn't a thing. I asked a bunch of old journalists, I'm like, can you go have a look? They scoured old newspapers. It doesn't exist. The article doesn't exist. The article in The Guardian, I asked Google Bard, it made it up too. So it's an interesting thing. One academic called it a conflabulation. It's a neurological concept where, I won't get into details too much, but basically if you have a partial truth, your brain will invent the story between it. And you'll pass a polygraph test. Brian Hay was saying they're rubbish, but you will be utterly convinced that it's true. And that's what large language models are doing. Obviously, they are not fonts of truth. That is not their job. But I think the way that they are treated, you need to be careful. And any writer, I don't know if there's any writers in here, but if there are, we're not at the moment scared about ChatGPT. So definitely invest. It's worth your energy. Now, on to the nuts and the bolts. I break up, and so do a lot of writers, break up good communication into three things. That's audience, structure, and message. And to quote rhetoric again by Aristotle, the audience is the judge. The audience is the king, okay? Whatever piece of communication that you're writing, if it goes to everyone, there is an audience in mind. There is ultimately someone that you need to influence at the expense of everyone else, almost every time. Newspapers that can be picked up by anyone have an archetypal reader in mind. You open it up, there's a politics section, gossip columns, whatever. They all know who they're writing for, and they're all distinct readers. So try to force yourself to think about who the most important person is. I break up audience into three things: knowledge, priorities, and tone. And we heard about tone and knowledge and a few of these things before, which was excellent. You need to understand these things in order to be an effective communicator. Otherwise, you're talking at someone rather than to them or with them. So knowledge is all about understanding what your reader definitely knows. Definitely knows. Now, how many people here, right, have received something on maybe an infosec or whatever, where they've gone, what's that? Like there's an acronym in there, I don't understand it, or whatever. You had to go and Google it, right? That's missing, that's paying, when people do that, they miss out on the knowledge, what's called the knowledge gap. So it's a place where someone is in terms of what they know, and then your message is over here, right? Ron Adelridge, I think his name was, in the 1960s, was tasked with spurring interest in college football games. Now, college football games are wonderful, but no one cares about them unless they're your team. So how do I make people care about them? Well, he realized that the knowledge gap was the problem, right? So he, would bring in the backstory of the star quarterback, the rivalries, the blood feuds between both the teams. He'd bring the cameras into the crowd, show the faces of the wild, supporters. And if that seems like a familiar model for sports broadcasting, it's because it became the default, became the wide world of sports. And it's an amazing thing to do. So you need to think about that. That's so, so, so critical. Know what they know and then give them the backfill, the backstory. Now, if this was a talk not on communication, but on denial of service attacks, right? Let's imagine it's that. And I said, well, a distributed denial of service attack is da-da-da-da-da. Right? No one is going to get cranky or go, I know that. You tend to be able to sit through that. That's fine. But if I didn't define it, and some of you in here to learn about denial of service attack, you probably wouldn't be having a good time. So always err on the side of caution and tend to over-explain something rather than less. Don't be too waffling, but always make sure you give people the requisite backstory, especially if you don't know where your stuff's going to get forwarded to or who might be an unintended recipient. Exposure is another big thing. in cybersecurity, most people read the news, so they probably care about iPhone hacks and stuff like that, rather than being absolutely eviscerated by the standard phishing stuff that just gets everyone, right? Where the attention actually should be. So understand their exposure and work with that. Don't work against it. Bring someone from where they were, even if it's a line that covers their expectations, and bring them into the fold a little bit. Bias and opinion matters too. So, if someone might think that there might be a cyber war person or whatever, work with those kinds of things as best you can. And that way you're going to be more effective. Priorities are the same deal. Everyone has an agenda. Maybe someone, the guy spoke about that stakeholder mapping. I love that. I had something like that before. I couldn't get it quite right. So people might care about their KPIs, getting their bonus. They want to get another Maserati or whatever. That's fine. Work with that. Or maybe if they're a regular user, they don't really understand that much. So you've got to kind of work with their priorities and operating style. Sorry, I skipped a slide. The other one was on tone. So basically on executives, so executives being time poor, generally speaking, right? Not enough time to, they want to get to the point. Every single minute matters to them. So I have a friend who is in a pretty good position in a cybersecurity company. He's a kind of CISO, and he writes to the CEO quite often. And what he does is write at the start, "This, Mr. CEO, this is what I need you to do," which is like pretty gutsy, right? Ordering the CEO around. And then he saves his job with the next sentence, justifying his life. But what he's really doing ultimately is putting that CEO first. That guy counts his minutes, everything matters, really get to the point straight away. This is from a Gartner analyst, Richard Adderscott. Treat cybersecurity as a business investment. Beautiful. I was going to incorporate it in. I thought, no, I'll use it straight away. It's amazing. So he's broken up into the same sort of thing, this idea of audience, broken them up into C-levels, right? Business, what they care about, all that kind of stuff. So it's really, really important that you do that before you start communicating. Structure, I've always tried to come up with a good analogy here, and I always fail. Kind of like building a house is the best I've got. Your story structure, when I say story, make that report, it's email, whatever, communications, right? So communication structure, if you like, is like a house. So you've got to get the cement, the foundations right first, and everything else. Otherwise, the thing's going to go wonky and fall over. You'll never win. And the sentence structure is like fitting out the floors. So we dive into that a little bit. The idea of a good sentence structure is to guide your reader, right? Much like grammar is the signposts that help you navigate a sentence, story structure guides your communication. If I mentioned burying the lead at the start, you see that in stories, and it's a really good indication that a journo or a writer hasn't undergone kind of formal traditional training. It's not a YouTube video, you're writing. You want someone to leave at the earliest point. So when Don Bradman died, the Daily Telegraph ran front cover, "Bradman dead." There it is. You know what happened in 2 words. That's a super effective headline. And a headline can be ported across to a subject line in an email, right? You don't necessarily want someone to open up your email if they don't have to, right? It's not about views and play count and all this kind of stuff. You're trying to let someone leave at the earliest point. That's a courtesy. You'll save them time and you're going to avoid confusion. If you bury the most important thing below a sentence at the start that doesn't tell them anything, they might give up and never read that critical bit. Around their time, in the aftermath of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the Minister of War came out at the time, a government guy, and announced it to journalists, right? And the way that he did it became the inverted pyramid of journalism, right? And it's something that's been used ever since. It's really effective in wartime reporting over dodgy communication lines, right? If the line's going to get cut, or in the world wars they used it too, the most important information is handed off immediately. And then you get more information as you go down. So you start off with distilled information. So again, headline is your email subject or your report or whatever it is. And then you start opening it up a little bit, right? You're giving context and background. You're never waffling though. And that's the kind of way that you should frame it. You'll find yourself rewriting stuff all the time. You might spend, like me, spend 80% of your time on the first 2 sentences, and the rest of it just, for me, it's like lining up a bowling shot, right? I've got to get the line right. If my headline's not, or not necessarily the headline, but if my first kind of opening, it doesn't matter if it's a report, my first opening sentences aren't quite right, that shot's going to go into the gutters. So I spend most of my time there. You can go and rewrite it. You don't have to rewrite it 100 times like the movie. But yeah, definitely put some focus into that. The curse of knowledge is this thing that affects every single one of us. It affects me now, and it's affecting me during this talk. Even though I know about it, it's not helping. It means that when you're an expert in something, you find it really difficult to communicate that. Or at least if you don't notice that, certainly the person listening to you does. You might have thought, oh God, what is this guy talking about, right? That is exactly what the curse of knowledge is. Knowing about it doesn't really help. So how do you get around this thing? It's there's so many number ones. Ugh. But a real big one is the curse of knowledge. It's a killer for good communication. So what do you do? How do you get around that? I go back to knowing your audience again. Ben and Kelly Decker, Communicate to Influence. It's in the guide, but go and check it out. It's a great book. They've got this thing called the Decker triangle, and it's this kind of map for good communication. It seems lovely. We don't have time to sort of go through it today, but go and check that out. That's really cool. So knowing their wants and desires, what motivates them, that stakeholder map again, go do that and test it out. Sentence structure is about breaking up your writing. Those tools, Grammarly and Microsoft, I use Microsoft, not Grammarly, because I've got it, will help you here. It's going to get angry if you start doing, a meme wall of text, that sort of thing. Generally speaking, new idea is a new sentence, and a new group of ideas is a new paragraph. So if you think of it as like apples and oranges, right? If you're writing about an apple and you're writing about an orange, they're all fruit, that's the story, but apples and oranges go in different sentences. If it's different coloured apples, maybe they can go together. Terrible analogy. Anyway, do your best. But that's kind of how that works. Otherwise, just hit enter a lot. No one's gonna get angry because you broke up your text. Walls of text suck. No one likes that. And sentence structure. Now, a little bit in the weeds. We're gonna come back out, I promise. And again, your grammar tools will help you here. I will not try to educate you on this sort of stuff. I'll get it wrong as well. Identifying the subject is a super important thing, and writing active. Everyone writes passive. The ball was kicked by Darren. You understand what I did, right? Took more words, a little bit more cognitive load. Darren kicked the ball. That's an active versus passive sentence. And these spell checkers will get very mad at you if you keep doing passive. Now, it can sound like a Gatling gun if you keep doing active all the time. You can chill out a little bit. I like to think that all the effort that you might put in here, if you've got this colossal report, you've got a template and a structure and all this, put it into like the email that you send it. The email is another thing to consider, because you might have a report, right? Well, you're probably not going to print the report and sort of walk up to the CISO with it wordlessly, drop it on the desk and kind of run away. It's probably going to be an accompanying email to go along with that. Well, that's a really important piece of communication too, right? So really put your effort into those things that you know are going to get read. Put all your emphasis there, and you can go and nerd out with the rest of it. That's okay. And then keeping things simple, which brings me on to message. Keeping it short and keeping it simple really, really matter. Concise language is the language of humans, and keeping things nice and short makes things really digestible. So using clear and concrete language is a mainstay. When I came across to the corporate world, I balked, and I still do. In my opinion, business speak has the initials of BS for a pretty good reason. So keep it out of your communications as much as you can. Someone might get cranky at you, fine. Again, don't break yourself. Use it if you need to. I've heard that it's an important thing in pitches, okay, but experiment, right? Everyone speaks the Macquarie Oxford Dictionary, and in my opinion, if it doesn't exist in the dictionary, it doesn't exist. So try not to invent too many words there, keep it really basic. And vagueness is the enemy of clarity, right? So there was a number of incidents that happened. How many, right? What's a number? Is that a lot, right? So concreteness is wonderful. Cliches as well. The cliches are super interesting. They're really effective in speeches. I could be using them now and you go, oh yeah, that's really true, you know. But in written text, they kind of don't work. They fall short. So eliminate cliches as best you can, and acronyms and initials. So there's ones that work all the time. So the CIA is known more as the CIA. The ACMA, another one. All these kind of agencies, typically agencies, are best known by their initialism or their acronym. That's okay. But if you're writing about a denial of service attack, there's not necessarily a reason to use DDoS all the time. There's not really a good reason to use DDoS if you're only going to mention it once. If you're going to mention denial of service attack all the way through, sure. But otherwise, just spell them out. Again, no one's going to get mad at you. But you will fall short if someone doesn't understand that acronym. I liked, again, you're trying to push people out the door. Please don't read this bloody report. Just take the knowledge and go away. Key takeaway in brief. And I used to write this colossal document, right? A security thing went all the way upstairs to the top. And I summarized this report into bullet points at the start of the report. I applied words per minute, like reading per minute, made it a bit slushy, increased it, and I said, read this report in 6 minutes, because that's how executives think, in minutes, right? Oh, do you have 6 minutes to learn all about security of your organization? So try to really empathize with them and get the message across as quick as you can. I mentioned language before. Avoiding corporate slogans is great. I love Bunnings. It was a good place to go and buy stuff, but I really like their slogan. Lowest prices are just the beginning. You walk in there and go, cool, everything's going to be pretty cheap. Southwest Airlines has one. Lowest fares, no hidden fees, right? You get on there, the staff are rude, the food's crap, the seats are sticky. You go, cool, but the ticket was cheap. Right? Your expectations are met. It sets the mood of the organisation as well. There's another airline that says going for great. Like, well, what's your interpretation of great? If you go, oh, cool, everything was good, but the plane was late and the staff are rude, you're going to be pretty disappointed. So again, that's concrete language, natural language. We are at the end very soon. I don't expect you to read this. This guy is George Orwell, and he wrote in Politics and Language in 1946. And in this big screed, and there were 6 points of writing. And the wonderful thing is, point 6 is ignore every single one of the rules if what you're writing sounds barbarous, which is great. But again, unless you're Roger Angel, right, stick to the rules, right? They're going to help you. Again, don't break yourself. Okay, time to publish, right? Imagine you are a reporter. Let's see if I don't break this. A reporter, and it's 6:25 in the morning, December 23, right, just before Christmas. These are the facts of what happened, right? I won't go over time, but have a little look and see if any of those, bearing in mind audience, right? So one of the facts here is this is Melbourne-based, so the Westgate Bridge is like this major arterial thing. If that goes down, it's bad. No one's getting to the city. So imagine that this kind of happened. And also, I don't know if trucks carry 20 tons of prawns. You'll just have to let that pass if you're a seafood person or a shipping expert. So which ones of these? What do you reckon? Anyone? Point 1, point 2, point 2, sweet. I did have a little click where I could click it and it would tick and cross. But point 2, sweet. Okay, all of them are relevant facts, by the way, but we're putting our audience first. Point 2, good. All right, so definitely, if you were going to be the journo on the radio is always first to print, you would have traffic congestion. It's madness. Get off the freeway. Take the back roads. You're not getting to work. Right? That's the first thing, because that's your audience. That's the people you care about. The truckie gets a look in and the other people there, all right? But firstly, it's going to be that. So that's putting your audience first. And if you're going to write these are fake stories, by the way. If you're going to write the evening news, it's all about the Christmas lunch. No prawns, you're eating seafood, right? That's it, unless you want to pay through the nose for your prawns. So all of that is really about putting your audience first. We opened with Roger Angel and his quote about perfect thought. And I love that, I really do. It's something very aspirational, but there was something else in that quote that I think is really salient for all of us. And if you follow the structures and you read and you read and you read, you'll become a great writer. And at the end of the day, every single one of us is a writer. We have the capacity to do this. It's just like anything else. It takes practice, tenacity, and a really thick skin. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you, Darren.